They are said to have touched Jesus during the pain and suffering of his final hours on earth. A chalice used at the Last Supper. The cloth given in kindness. Iron nails hammered through flesh. Fragments of a wooden cross. A crown of thorns. A roughly worked sign. The tip of a spear. Burial garments. For believers, objects of miraculous power. For the Catholic Church, touchstones of faith.
The Son of God died on the cross, so the instruments of his torture and death become the instruments of the salvation of the world.
Material remains of history's most infamous execution. Physical items chronicling the death of a Messiah. To the faithful, they are part of the mystery of Christ's passion on the cross.
This image is unexplainable today. It has been even more unexplainable 400 years ago, 1,000 years ago.
They are believed to possess power beyond description.
We do get a number of cases where relics were carried into battle as a kind of talisman to help you win a battle.
Some are believed to have caused miracles, others to have spawned disaster. Now, the relics of the Passion of Jesus Christ tell their stories. In Taxco, Mexico, the faithful bind their feet with chains, seeking closeness to their Savior by feeling the pain he endured. Believers drive nails into their flesh and are raised on rough wooden crosses. In the Philippines, the devoted carry cross-like weights jagged with thorns and flagellate themselves with spiked whips. In San Antonio, Texas, worshippers recreate the final moments of their Lord. In passion plays and pageants like these throughout the world, Christians try to understand the meaning of Jesus' life and death. But the devout seeking connection with Jesus need not suffer physical pain or shed their blood. Many think an answer is to be found at sites throughout the world where what they believe are genuine artifacts from his crucifixion 2,000 years ago still exist. The Abbey of Santa Croce, or Holy Cross, in Rome dates from the 4th century. It houses hundreds of relics, one of the largest collections in the world.
We saw people here who hadn't set foot in a church for 30, 35, 40 years, who melt into tears and recognize their disbelief in front of the Lord.
All of a sudden, they find themselves in the chapel with these relics, and their faith does seem to come out.
For the devout, Santa Croce's relics are a gateway into the past, to the terrible Friday when Jesus was crucified. An iron nail said to have been hammered through Jesus' flesh, 4 inches long and a 1/4 inch wide at the top. It now rests in a protective case, its squared shaft tapered to a blunt point, specifically designed to inflict maximum pain.
So that it wouldn't cause a quick death, but a rather slow one. The Romans planned very carefully this kind of pain they wanted the prisoners to feel.
For centuries, the nail was displayed unprotected and in the open. Officials at Santa Croce claim that it has never been cleaned, and yet it has inexplicably defied the ravages of oxidation.
We are here from 1561, And ever since then, the fathers noted in our archives that never once signs of rust have appeared on this nail. I believe that there is something supernatural and divine.
Also at Santa Croce are these fragments of wood enclosed in a cross-shaped case and said to be from the cross on which Jesus was crucified. Each is 3 inches long and a ½ inch wide. Other churches also claim to have pieces of the cross. Indeed, more than 10,000 fragments populate various collections worldwide. But Santa Croce is home to one relic that the faithful can find only here. A walnut slab said to be the Titulus Crucis, the sign affixed to Jesus' cross to mock him as he suffered. 9½ inches long, 5½ inches wide, and 1 inch thick, inscribed with 3 lines written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. Traces of the phrase, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews," are visible. Like all Santa Croce's wooden relics, the Titulus has suffered significant decay over the centuries.
We discovered that they were constantly attacked by bacteria, termites, and all of these things that damage the wood itself. Talking to scientists and experts, they recommended that we monitor the relics for 1 year to understand their real condition.
In 2005, the Santa Croce officials took action. They closed the abbey to the public and cleaned the relics. Then, on the recommendation of scientific experts and with Vatican approval, they hermetically sealed them in glass.
Only once a year, a group of experts are allowed to open it to check on the condition of the relics. Otherwise, it has no reason to be opened, because the whole purpose of it is to prevent any kind of damage to the wood.
Di polvere o di qualsiasi tipo di attacco al legno.
How these relics came to Santa Croce is a story that seems no less miraculous than the objects themselves. It is said that from the time of Jesus' crucifixion, his followers had safeguarded the relics in Jerusalem. However, by the 3rd century AD, Rome was waging a brutal campaign of persecution against the early Christians. One of the many ways the empire tried to destroy their faith was to seize their relics. But Rome's legions faced resistance springing from deep-rooted faith.
The relics were always very important to the people who took care of them. They were willing to suffer death to protect them.
Christians smuggled relics out of the Holy Land under cover of darkness. The young religion and its relics were forced underground. But an extraordinary turn of events occurred in 312 AD when Rome's Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity. In his Edict of Milan a year later, Constantine ordered an end to the persecution of Christians. He also decreed that the relics of Mary, Jesus, and the apostles be found and brought to him in Rome, which he had rededicated as a Christian city. What happened next is described in 5th century documents that most scholars believe are a mixture of fact and fiction. According to those documents, Constantine entrusted this formidable task to his 80-year-old mother, Helena. Her voyage from Rome to Jerusalem spanned nearly 1,500 miles.
The Christians of Jerusalem at that time knew she was coming in advance because this pilgrimage was highly publicized, if you could say that, for its time.
The Jerusalem that awaited Helena was still recovering from the effects of Roman plunder and desecration. The previous emperor Hadrian had suppressed a revolt by the Jews, and in an effort to erase Jewish landmarks, he had also destroyed Christian holy sites. He had even built a temple to Venus at what was said to be the site of the crucifixion. It was to this spot that local Christians brought Helena after her arrival in Jerusalem.
And she went into this place where this temple of Venus was located with the Bishop of Jerusalem, Macarius, and through some miraculous inspiration or vision, this is the spot, let's start digging.
According to literary tradition, Helena and her assistants found not one cross but 3, and some claim it was then that the relic began to exert miraculous powers.
So how are they going to know which cross is the cross that the Lord was crucified on? They found a woman who was terribly ill, and they had her press her body against each of the crosses. And she was miraculously cured by the wood of the cross that the Lord had been crucified on.
The story goes that Helena broke off pieces of the true cross so they could be distributed to church officials throughout Constantine's empire. Helena's next goal was to locate the crucifixion nails. Legend has it that she began to pray and that the nails suddenly appeared gleaming like gold. Christians considered the nails to be among the holiest of all relics, as they were said to have pierced the Saviour's flesh. Helena wanted her son Constantine to benefit from their holy power.
It was Helena's idea to take some of those nails and to have them put into his helmet as a kind of spiritual protection of him, and to have one put in the bridle of his horse.
Many military leaders followed Constantine's example, seeking to exploit the purported power of the relics.
We do get a number of cases where relics were carried into battle as a kind of talisman to help you win a battle, as a kind of magic weapon, if you like.
Her mission accomplished, Helena left Jerusalem in 327 AD, bound for Rome. But she didn't survive the journey. However, it's said that some of her relics did, and were kept at her Roman palace, which later became the Abbey of Santa Croce. Over the centuries, the allure of Helena's relics for the faithful has never abated, nor has the question of their authenticity. They can be genuine only if Helena's story is accurate, but there is little evidence to support it.
That whole story is suspect, and contemporaries made no mention of finding this, so it's clear, and the story got better every time it was told, so that's a pious legend and not to be taken seriously.
Carbon dating of the titulus has validated such skepticism. The results put its origins in the Middle Ages. So far, the Church has declined all requests by scientists to analyze the cross or the nail. The power of a relic, of course, has at least as much to do with belief as authenticity. That was certainly the case with another relic of the Passion, one deemed so valuable it was used as collateral for an empire.
They twisted a crown of thorns and placed it on his head, with a cane in his right hand. Falling on their knees before him, they jeered at him, "Hail, King of the Jews."
You have 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John, in that order, who talk about the crucifixion. They all agree on certain things, but they specifically mentioned that the soldiers, in mocking and abusing Jesus, went off and found some kind of shrubbery that had thorns attached, that they beat into some kind of crown or helmet that they smashed onto his head.
The crown of thorns conjures up one of the most vivid images of the crucifixion of Christ. While the biblical accounts agree a crown existed, the blood-stained circlet of reeds disappeared after the crucifixion and was lost for centuries. Then in 570 AD came a sudden clue as to its whereabouts. In Jerusalem, a pilgrim named Antoninus of Piacenza reported that it had survived.
He claims that the Church of Mount Zion in Jerusalem had an object that they called a crown of thorns, and this is what people are coming in and honoring as that relic.
According to St. Gregory of Tours, who was writing at the same time, the thorns of the crown were still green, and their color was miraculously renewed every day. For the faithful, miraculous power still suffused the crown half a millennium later, when it surfaced again in Constantinople. But by then, the crown's thorns had been removed. As the actual points of contact with the head and blood of Christ, they were deemed so sacred that each became an individual relic, and they were passed from monarch to monarch. This dispersion of relics into separate pieces wasn't unusual in the Christian world.
This parallels what Christians did with the bodies of saints and martyrs. What did they do? They dismembered them, which is grisly and ghastly to modern people to hear this, but they would take pieces of relics and disperse them so all of the Christian community could share in this divine presence.
Meanwhile, the crown itself, even without the thorns, was still one of the most important relics in Christendom. Its value was so great that in 1238 it was even used to finance an empire. Baldwin II, the Latin Emperor of Constantinople, gave the crown to the city of Venice as collateral for a large loan. When Baldwin defaulted on the debt, the Venetians sold the crown to King Louis IX of France for 135,000 lire, an amount more than half the yearly expenditure of the realm. The king's piety was matched only by his business acumen. He knew the crown would draw pilgrims to Paris.
There's a lot of money involved in terms of pilgrimage, but let's turn that around. There's a lot of demand that the average person who is illiterate, who lives in grinding poverty, who lacks modern medicine and all the things that we can rely on when we're sick or we're fearful, the relics provide tremendous comfort.
Louis housed his newly acquired crown in Sainte-Chapelle, or the Holy Chapel, on the Ile de la Cité in the center of Paris.
Today in modernity, wealthy people will give money for noble causes, and they'll have their name on a building. In the Middle Ages, a king like Louis IX would build a magnificent chapel as a kind of showcase of the best that French Gothic art would have.
During the French Revolution, the crown of thorns was moved out of Sainte-Chapelle as a protective measure and quietly placed in the Bibliothèque Nationale. Then, in 1806, it was deposited in the Cathedral of Notre Dame, where it remains today. In 1908, scientists examined the woven vine said to be the crown of thorns. They determined that it was made from a bush known as the Sisyphus spina Christi, a plant indigenous to Israel. The crown is still venerated by believers as an object of mystical power. But another relic of the Passion exists with still greater claims to miraculous power.
One of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there was a flow of blood and water. This is vouched for by an eyewitness, whose evidence is to be trusted. He knows that he speaks the truth, so that you too may believe.
The Spear of Destiny, believed by many to have survived the centuries to become the treasured talisman of Germany's First, Second, and Third Reichs.
The legend of the spear is that whoever possesses it and understands the powers it serves holds the destiny of mankind in their hand for good or evil.
The spear is said to have been used by a Roman centurion named Gaius Cassius Longinus to pierce the side of Jesus. Some say that this was an act of mercy in a merciless time, that Longinus used his spear in a humane way to prevent Roman soldiers from breaking Jesus' legs, a brutal practice designed to bring on death.
Cassius wanted to show that Jesus did not have to be mutilated. And so he demonstrated he's already dead by sticking him with his spear.
The faithful believed that Longinus, who is said to have suffered from extremely poor vision, was rewarded with a miracle for his act of mercy.
The blood ran down the spear, and when it touched his hands, he touched his eyes with the blood on them, and he was cured of his blindness.
The story of this miracle isn't in the Bible. It's recorded in books known as the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha are accounts of the lives of Jesus, Mary, and the saints that elaborate on and sometimes contradict New Testament stories. Like other relics of the Passion, the spear resurfaced with Emperor Constantine. Some historical documents suggest that around 330 AD, he claimed possession of the spear and put it to a most unusual purpose.
As Constantine is laying out the city that became Constantinople, he repeatedly said in a loud voice that all who were with him could hear, "I follow in the footsteps of he who goes before me," meaning apparently Jesus. And as he's laying it out, he's carrying the spear with him, and he's claiming that Jesus is leading him around. And it's with the spear, showing him, you want the streets here, you want the gardens over here, you're going to build the chapel here.
Legend has it that the spear passed from the hands of Constantine to Charlemagne, founder of France and Germany. Today, there are at least 4 spears with claims to be the one that passed through their hands, but the one with the best documented lineage lies in the treasury of Vienna's Hofburg Palace. It may be the oldest of all.
The lance that is located in the treasury has been handed down since the 10th century as a part of the insignias of the Holy Roman Empire. And thus, basically every important emperor of the Roman Empire had it in his hands.
It was this spear that supposedly drew the attention of a young artist named Adolf Hitler. In 1908, some historians believe he beheld it and encountered his destiny.
He has an epiphany. He has a past life experience. The spear tells him, I know who you were, and reveals himself to himself.
The holy relic, which had been possessed by Charlemagne and the Habsburgs, the rulers of the First and Second Reichs, or empires, fell into the hands of Hitler when he ruled the Third Reich. Journalists report that the spear was presented to the Führer at a dinner in Vienna 4 days after Germany annexed Austria on March the 9th, 1938. After Hitler's Third Reich crumbled, the spear remained at the Vienna Palace. But is it a true relic?
In 1993, Dr. Robert Feather, a metallurgist and a Bible scholar, he was allowed to conduct tests on the spear. And he concluded that the spearhead was probably forged in the 6th or 7th century.
Of course, whether this ancient relic is literally the spear that pierced Jesus is to some extent irrelevant. Its power lies in the belief that millions of people have brought to it over many hundreds of years. Yet another relic of the Passion that has inspired the faithful for centuries is a fragile piece of cloth that seems to bear an image of Christ, and that some call miraculous. No relic has had such veneration paid to it that people throw themselves on the ground, most of them with tears in their eyes and with lamentations and cries of compassion. So wrote the 16th century French philosopher Michel de Montaigne about a revered relic now on display in a church in the village of Manopolo, Italy. Veronica's veil, a 6.5 by 9.5 inch cloth, bearing the likeness of Jesus. Made of a rare fiber called byssus, woven from the rock-clinging threads of ocean mussels.
It's a very, very ancient fabric. It's a very precious fabric you find in the graves of pharaohs. It is a key relic of all relics. It's not only the mother of images, but also a mother of relics.
When the devoted pilgrims arrive, they get on their knees and start walking up the stairs leading to the crypt where the sacred image is, and they stop on each and every step to pray.
The image of Jesus looking out at the pilgrim changes depending on the light striking it. A pensive expression becomes a subtle smile. The faithful believe that this unique portrait is the result of a miracle. A miracle that occurred as the condemned Jesus marched toward Calvary. According to the Apocrypha, he encountered a pious and merciful woman named Veronica.
She follows Jesus along the Via Dolorosa, and she has a cloth that she wipes his face with. And then his facial image is miraculously transported to that cloth.
The Apocrypha describes how Veronica's veil became imbued with miraculous powers. Merely touching it was enough for imprisoned Christians to quench their thirst, the blind to restore their sight, and the dead to rise again. For many Christians today, the story of how the veil eventually found its way to Monopolo is a miracle in itself. After the Apocrypha, there are no written accounts of the veil for more than 1,000 years. Then in 1297, historical documents record how Pope Boniface VIII decreed that a mysterious veil bearing an image of Jesus be brought to Rome.
It just appears 1,000 years later. And when you get into something like that, then you raise critical questions, historical questions. You say, well, what's going on here?
For more than 2 centuries, church officials kept the veil in St. Peter's Basilica. Then, soon after 1506, when workers had rebuilt the basilica into the grand structure we know today, the veil disappeared. Locating the veil became extremely difficult because artists motivated by either piety or profit began painting copies of it across Europe. In 1629, Pope Urban VIII ordered the destruction of all the reproductions.
He delivered an edict saying, I need all the copies of the Veronica back, all of them. Those who don't deliver, they are excommunicated from the community of the church.
In 1660, the veil acknowledged by many Christians today as genuine appeared in Monopolo.
According to the tradition, the image got here in a mysterious way. A pilgrim came with this package containing the veil with the sacred image and entrusted it to a doctor. And after delivering this veil, the pilgrim remained unknown and disappeared and was not seen again. So from this it was argued that he might have been an angel.
For those who believe in the rich traditions surrounding the veil, to look upon it is to look into the eyes of Christ. To enhance the viewer's experience, the shrine is equipped with adjustable front and back lighting.
When the light illuminates the back of the image, you can see the wounds as if they were still open, bleeding and with a shadow around. But if the image is illuminated from a different angle, the wounds are a little smaller and with little crusts. The way the image is portrayed, with its different expressions and all the rest, it doesn't seem to be painted by a human hand.
While many agree with Padre Cucinelli, many others attribute the image's different aspects to an artist's clever sleight of hand. However, Sister Blandina Pascalis Schlomer, a Trappist nun, believes fervently in the veil's authenticity. So much so that she gained permission for a transfer from her native Germany to Italy, just to be closer to it. In an effort to prove the veil's authenticity, Sister Blandina has devoted herself to comparing it to other images purporting to be of Jesus. The most crucial comparison is with the Shroud of Turin. Like the veil, the shroud is believed to be not merely a likeness of Jesus, but an image miraculously produced by direct contact with Jesus himself.
I kept finding new points of reference over and over again. There were lines around the wrinkles in the shape of a kidney. Then there were forms which were the same in both. Very strange.
But how closely does the image on the veil truly resemble the one on the shroud? Dr. Todd Fenton is one of America's top forensic scientists specializing in photo superimposition. This technique is most often used to match a security camera image from a crime scene with a mugshot of a suspect. Dr. Fenton uses this technique to compare the facial proportions of the images on Veronica's veil and the shroud. Placing the two images side by side, he compares 4 main points: the lip line, the tip of the nose, and the edges of the eyes. When he lines up the eyes, he discovers that the lip and nose lines don't match.
They are dramatically different in their facial proportionalities. Because the face on the shroud and Veronica's veil do not share the same facial proportionalities, then I can confidently exclude those two images as being a match.
If Fenton's analysis is accurate, the veil and the shroud do not depict the same man. At least one of them can't be an authentic image of Jesus. But forensic science rarely alters the faith of a believing heart.
For me, it was proof that that is really Jesus, because it gives you peace.
I met people here who said, "Did you see? He just smiled." Or sometimes he get very angry. I mean, they really have a very personal relationship, as if he would be part of the family.
Another cloth relic awaits the devout in a remote Spanish village. It's said to have been with Jesus as he rose from the dead.
He noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying to the side. Then the other disciple also went in, and he saw and believed, for until then they had not understood that the scriptures said he would rise from the dead.
The linen wrappings to which the Bible refers make up the burial shroud that was placed around Jesus' body. The Shroud of Turin is regarded by many as that original shroud, but there's another, smaller cloth, the cloth that would have covered Jesus' head in accordance with ancient Jewish burial practices. It's known as the sudarium. Many believe that a cloth preserved in a cathedral in Oviedo, Spain, is the genuine sudarium that once touched Jesus' blood-stained face.
It's not mentioned during the actual account of the burial of Christ, but on the Easter Sunday morning, what's described in the tomb is the larger linen cloth, and lying apart to one side was a smaller cloth, a sudarium.
The Oviedo sudarium measures 34 by 21 inches and features symmetrical marks that many believe to be bloodstains. The symmetry of the marks indicates that the cloth was folded in half. Historian Mark Guskin points out some of the details they found using a replica of the sudarium.
What we can see here, and the main stains, are that these are obviously parallel stains from the cloth having been folded over onto itself This area here would correspond to the beard, the mouth and the nose, with the liquid that came out through there. Whereas these stains are the stains from the forehead area, from when the body was lying on the ground. Now these stains are just blood that was shed in life from wounds that were caused by short, sharp objects, perfectly compatible with a crown of thorns. If these are placed over the corresponding stains on the Shroud of Turin, then the outline is identical.
After Jesus' body vanished from the tomb, historians believe his burial clothes came into the possession of those who wanted to preserve them. But as with other Passion relics, historical references to the Sudarium don't begin until centuries after the crucifixion. The first account is that of Antoninus of Piacenza.
He writes in 570 that the Sudarium was being cared for in a cave near the monastery of St. Mark in the vicinity of Jerusalem, and that religious women actually lived in this cave. That was their sole purpose, to take care of the Sudarium.
The exact relationship between the Sudarium and the Shroud has intrigued researchers for centuries. It's believed that the Sudarium was placed over Jesus' face first, then replaced by the burial shroud in the tomb. After completing a study in 1998, researchers asserted that both are stained with blood type AB, a common blood type among Middle Eastern people. Other researchers have mapped the bloodstains on both the Sudarium and Shroud and believe they coincide. All told, the frontal stains on the Sudarium are said to have 70 points of coincidence with the Shroud, while the backside is said to have 50.
Everybody who's ever looked at the bloodstains on both cloths comes to the conclusion, and it's a scientific conclusion, it's not just wishful thinking, that no matter who these cloths were used upon, no matter which corpse, which body they wrapped, it was the same body.
Although to believers the Shroud and Sudarium have always been linked, the two relics were thought to have been physically separated long ago. Experts speculate that the Sudarium may have been spirited out of Jerusalem during an invasion in the 7th century.
Now in that year, 614, the Persian army under King Khosroes II invaded Palestine and Jerusalem. People fled, and they took everything they had with them, not only their relics, which were very important to them, but their personal possessions, and fled.
According to historical accounts, it took decades for the bearer of the Sudarium to carry it across the war-torn Mediterranean to Spain. It remains in Oviedo in northern Spain today. Scientists have carbon-dated the Sudarium and found it to be from the 7th century. Earlier, the Shroud of Turin had been carbon-dated to the 14th century, some 700 years later. Despite these findings, believers continue to point to an unbroken chain of documents that they contend connects the Sudarium from Jerusalem to Spain.
You must be able to believe the history of the Sudarium of Oviedo, whether you are a Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, atheist, whatever. This is the cloth's history, as established by all the documents we have.
As with all relics of the Passion, the truth shifts, depending on whether one is a believer or a skeptic. Those same shifting perspectives apply to another relic with an alleged history of movement from Jerusalem to Spain. A relic that has inspired legends, dedicated quests and battles, the Holy Grail. It is the most fabled of all Christian relics. Its history is mysterious, and its legend exerts continued fascination. It is the Holy Grail, the sacred chalice said to have been used by Christ and the apostles at the Last Supper.
Two things are mentioned as being on the table, so to speak. One is a cup, and one is the dish from which they eat. The cup, in later language, becomes known as the chalice.
According to the faithful, the relic was then safeguarded by St. Peter in the Holy Land.
Tradition has always maintained that St. Peter took the cup to Rome and that he used it to say the Mass. When he died, it was passed on to his successors and used by all the early popes to say Mass until St. Sixtus II in the year 258 AD.
But the persecution of Christians that began in the year 250 under Emperor Valerian required that relics be turned over to the Roman government. Tradition has it that Pope Sextus II had given the chalice to his deacon, St. Lawrence, and Lawrence was not about to give it to the Romans.
There was a Spanish soldier in Rome at the time by the name of Persalius, and he gave him the cup with instructions to take it back to his homeland.
The chalice's history then becomes even more tenuous as a proliferation of Grail stories hopelessly mixed fact and fiction.
These stories were told at evening. They were narrated by poets. There were fascinating stories about people dealing with the faith, knights fighting to rescue the Holy Land.
Some of the most popular stories were collected and blended with Celtic and German tales by Sir Thomas Malory. Published in 1485, they told romantic tales of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. As Malory told it, when the famed sword in the stone appeared, Sir Galahad, son of Sir Lancelot, was the only knight besides Arthur himself who was able to pull it out. For this, he was chosen to undertake the quest for the Holy Grail. He found it after years of struggle and travail, and then died having reached his life's goal. Another Grail story places it in the hands of a succession of Spanish monarchs. The last to possess it was King Alfonso in 1200.
The only problem was that he was frequently absent due to military campaigns. He needed money to pay for these, so he went to the Cathedral of Valencia, asked them for a loan, and they said, okay, but only on the condition that you give us the Holy Grail as collateral. So he did that, and he never repaid the loan, and it's been there ever since.
The Holy Grail of Valencia stands about 7 inches high, including its stand. The cup, carved out of agate, is 3.5 inches in diameter. This agate cup fits St. Jerome's description of the cup used by Christ for the consecration. This is the only part that could possibly have been present at the Last Supper. The remainder of the stand with its Arabic inscriptions must have been added later. But other Grail cups also lay claim to authenticity.
Bueno, es importante tener claro que, aunque a veces se dice...
It is said that there are other holy chalices in other places. For example, the sacred Catino of Genoa.
El Santo Cáliz. En ocasiones se ha dicho que existen otros...
But we must consider that none, other than the Valencia cup, holds the minimum historical provenance.
Estos otros supuestos...
Those other chalices don't have the credentials, as opposed to ours in Valencia.
Ninguna credencial que haga que esos cálices sean, se puedan oponer al nuestro de Valencia.
While some debate the authenticity of individual chalices, others point out that through the centuries, the Holy Grail has evolved into something far more than a simple cup.
The Holy Grail is a symbol of a quest, the quest for the faith, the quest for God. It was not only one single object.
For many, that quest continues. Whether revered relics prove to be authentic or not, they seem to speak to a deep human need to find a connection with the divine. Relics may be witnesses to history or simply fabrications, but their power is undeniable. And if that power doesn't exist in the objects themselves, it does exist in the minds of the faithful.